Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Comptroller for taking time out of his busy schedule to be here today. We are here today to talk about the fiscal stress monitoring system. This is a system that the Comptroller put into place in 2013, I believe, and it was a way to allow municipalities and the public to really see firsthand how each of the municipalities were doing and to give warnings about fiscal stress, and also to focus this very important public discussion on the drivers that are causing fiscal instability. And so I asked the Comptroller to come here so that we could talk about some of the steps that the City of Syracuse has taken, which has resulted in every year that the fiscal stress monitoring system has come out, we have gotten better and better. And ultimately, this year, when the monitoring ratings came out, we were given no designation, which is the most positive designation that you can receive. And this designation was given to us, but it was not done without a lot of hard work and tough decisions. Some big ones, like determining not to engage in the pension borrowing program often by the state, also engaging in very tough negotiations with our unions to make sure that there was more money paid for health insurance, as well as lots of decisions, if not hundreds of decisions, made every day by the hardworking employees of the City of Syracuse, recognizing that we had to be very good fiscal stewards of our resources. And all of those decisions have culminated in us receiving a designation of no designation from the fiscal stress monitoring system by the Comptroller. Also, every year, an increased bond rating that also has helped us be more efficient with our resources, and has ultimately led us to be on the precipice of good stewardship and sound practices that have been recognized by the Comptroller, by Wall Street, and by others. So with that, I would like to bring the Comptroller up to also talk about his goals with the fiscal stress monitoring and talk about the trends that impact all of us in terms of the fiscal stress.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. It is always a privilege to be in Syracuse, and once again, to stand with Mayor Miner. We have many dedicated mayors and municipal officials all across our state, but I have really benefited from the working relationship that I enjoy, my office enjoys, with Mayor Miner and her staff, as we all continue to navigate through very tough economic and budget times. I have found this city and this mayor really to be in the forefront of innovation and creativity, and not being shy about confronting the real issues that are out there. So it really is a privilege to be with the mayor once again to talk about your city's finances and really talk about the challenges that are facing our municipalities, particularly our cities, and particularly our upstate cities. This certainly is not a new topic for Mayor Miner. It certainly has been a key part of her stewardship of this city. And I do give her tremendous credit for continuing to raise, for a broader discussion in the state, that issue of how we come together to find workable solutions to these challenges. Certainly, as the mayor already indicated, my office has stepped up our involvement and our role in dealing with this issue of fiscal stress. We see what's happening in other states in this nation, cities in California that have filed for bankruptcy, Detroit, where certainly that has become the poster child for budgets that get out of control and stress situations that aren't identified early. We have never had a municipal bankruptcy in New York State. We don't intend to have one in New York State. And that really was the genesis behind that fiscal stress monitoring system that the mayor mentioned we have implemented. It's meant to be an early warning system so that if we have a municipality or a school district, a community headed for trouble, we can early on identify what those issues are and hopefully at the local level and with some help from the state avert a full financial or budget collapse. So our fiscal monitoring system was implemented in 2013, and as I said, it is a system designed to identify localities that are showing signs of budgetary strain. We do this on an annual basis now. We update the scores for our school districts and our municipalities. We use data that has already been submitted to our office by about 4,000 local governments. So this system was developed without creating any additional information mandate or cost on localities. So then we calculate based on our scoring system using objective criteria, and we do a scoring, and then we publicize what the overall score of stress is for municipalities and our school districts. We have 3 classifications. If you reach the threshold where you're in stress, you could be identified as being in significant fiscal stress, moderate fiscal stress, or susceptible to fiscal stress. So again, all this information has been out there. Over the years, we developed this system with input from local officials. We use a thoughtful, objective criteria. The good news for a community like Syracuse is, in the 3 years that we've been doing this, Syracuse has never been in any of those stress categories. And that certainly is very, very good news for this community. Some people have said, well, you're pointing a finger and you're spotlighting perhaps in a negative way communities that are having a problem. Well, my answer to that is we really want people, first of all, the local community to know what's going on in their own neighborhood. But we really use this scoring to help policymakers in Albany, the legislature particularly, understand that there are some big issues that are happening that are affecting all of our municipalities, as a way to hopefully come up with some solutions. Certainly Syracuse has not been without challenges, and this mayor has been very forthright about identifying those challenges. But it is significant that in spite of those challenges, this city has never been in any fiscal stress category based on our objective system. We do have 12 cities in New York that are designated in one of those 3 fiscal stress categories. The city scores certainly have fluctuated over this time, but have remained consistently below any threshold where they could be considered in stress here in Syracuse. Similar to other cities across New York and other urban communities, there are certainly issues, red flags, that I know the mayor is on top of and her team is on top of. Syracuse did receive some points in terms of fund balance, short-term cash flow, debt issuance, and fixed cost indicators. And the city did receive some points for operating deficits and liquidity in 2015. But again, this is the value of a monitoring system like we have. It provides a roadmap to help mayors, to help elected officials understand where they have some issues that they have to deal with and that they have to address. I'm very impressed that Mayor Miner addresses these challenges head on. We often talk on the phone, when we talk in person, when we're at an event together. She fully understands what she has to deal with. And one of the big issues that we often find lacking is that a community does not develop a long-term financial plan. And there's always one piece of advice that my staff and I always offer to any community, certainly one that's facing stress issues: come up with a long-term financial plan. That's very, very key. Mayor Miner has done that to address potential budget gaps, to deal with issues like operational deficits, and to be very judicious in the use of reserve funds. The mayor has prudently offered conservative revenue estimates and has been smart to not project any great increase in state aid. Don't rely on something that is not about to materialize. The mayor knows the reality of the numbers that she faces. She has not backed down from addressing the reality of those numbers time and again. And that's what has made the difference for Syracuse, not to be a city, like some others in our state, that end up in a stress condition. Moving forward, advice that I could offer the mayor that probably she knows already: keep an eye on sales tax. It's the largest single revenue source for the city, and given economic challenges, lower than anticipated collections could very well impact on the city's budget and the city's bottom line. Tax-exempt property, long been an issue in the city. We stood together a year ago, 2 years ago, talking about this issue when I released the report on tax, and Syracuse certainly was a prime example. 57% of the city's property listed as tax exempt. This is another area where the mayor has been a leader, successfully negotiating a significant increase in service agreements with Syracuse University, a new agreement with Krause Hospital. Of course, these are voluntary agreements to help recoup some of the costs associated with providing city services to these institutions. As agreements with other nonprofits expire, the city's ability to continue to negotiate these agreements is certainly going to be key. The other reality is state and federal aid, in many cases, in many categories, just hasn't kept pace with local costs. The property tax, the most significant source of local revenue, of course, is also subject to our state's property tax cap. So again, areas that you have to pay close attention to. The state, of course, does need to be a partner with all of our cities. And one area that I've talked about, and I think the mayor shares my view on this, there have been increases in many parts of the state budget, but AIM funding, the revenue sharing effect for our cities has not increased, even in this past year's budget. So that's another area where I think advocacy would be appropriate. At the same time, the context of this city, again, not dissimilar from many of our other cities across the state, there are a number of socioeconomic hurdles and challenges. As of the last census for the City of Syracuse in 2010, the child poverty rate was listed at 44%, the third highest child poverty rate of any city in our state. The unemployment rate in the city stands at 7.2%, compared to an average of 6.5% for the other 15 cities which recently received their stressed scores. In the 2 decades from 1990 to 2010, Syracuse's population declined by 11%, or nearly 20,000 residents, now at about 145,000. So a declining population, higher percentage of families in need, more expectation of services, all of that has an impact in terms of the city's budget picture. For municipalities facing these kinds of demographic challenges, the demand for city services is there and can grow and can strain budgets. Since we've implemented our fiscal stress monitoring system 3 years ago, again, one of my priorities is to get municipal leaders to focus on that issue of long-range planning, and also to be open and honest, have that honest conversation with your colleagues in government, with your residents, with your taxpayers, about what the challenges are. When elected leaders and their constituents come together and work together, as has happened here in the city of Syracuse, they can help the municipality become more efficient, more creative, more forward-thinking, and more effective with the resources that are available. And I certainly have my continued confidence well placed in Mayor Stephanie Miner and her colleagues here in Syracuse, going to continue to be that innovative and forward-thinking administration that I know the city to be. And it's a year away, but I'm confident on the path that you're on. Once again, you won't have any designation of fiscal stress as we head to the future. So thank you, Mayor Miner, for giving me the opportunity to talk about our program, because it really is meant to be a guidepost and to help be a roadmap so that communities that may be in a level of stress to know how to get out of it, communities that aren't in stress to know what they need to do, how to manage their budget and their finances to make sure that they don't end up in stress. And I appreciate the mayor's interest in having us promote what it is we're doing to help places like Syracuse manage and navigate through these very tough economic and budgetary times. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Miner.
So I was remiss, it just so happens in the timing that we scheduled this, that the council today voted on our budget, which continues our practices of solid fiscal management and making sure that we have continue the practice of paying off as much debt as we send out, and all of those practices that have been highlighted by the Comptroller as sound and also have been highlighted by Wall Street in the bond houses as well. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions on topic that anyone has.
Is there anything that you've done in the last 3 years to kind of ensure that you're ahead of the curve when you go into formulas like this?
You know, Tom, that's a great question. I smile because it's kind of like every day we think about this. It's the kind of the fiscal stewardship management part of the city government allows you to provide high quality services. So there is at no point that you cannot think about costs. When you save on costs, then you have money to spend on services. So again, these are small decisions, but they're also big decisions. So negotiating an agreement that I announced last month, I guess it was, with Syracuse University for $7 million. Also, when we are in negotiations with our unions, talking about how important it is when our healthcare costs are going up by 30%, that there be an equal sharing of that burden. Talking about the fact that our pension costs are going down, but they're going down slowly. And so there's, that we have to continue to be cognizant of that. Going in front of the state and federal leaders and talking about the importance of infrastructure. And because we have so little margins, that we have not been able to maintain and repair our infrastructure and meet the challenges of the 21st century, and talking about those kind of things. So those are all decisions and points of public policy advocacy that we make because we are aware of these trends, and we are aware that if we don't keep a steady eye on these issues, we will not be able to provide the kind of services that people expect a city to provide, need us to provide in order to have a good quality of life.
If I could just comment on that just very briefly, I find there are often two different strategies that mayors sometimes utilize. One is to look very inward and say, how can I make decisions today here within my jurisdiction that will benefit the budget and the finances? The other approach that some take is, well, this is all out of our control. I better go to Albany, I better go to Washington, explain what it is they have to do to help us. Mayor Miner is doing both. She's doing what she can do, working with her colleagues in the city government to figure out short-term what's within the purview of the powers of the mayor and the council to make these tough choices and to be creative within what they're allowed to work with. And then beyond that, to also give voice to some of the structural issues that need to be dealt with, particularly in terms of the relationship between the state and its municipal partners. So I'm glad you are up 27 hours a day to be able to do both, because some people tend to do one or the other.
Mario Sacco, News Channel 9. In the budget approval today was a $3 million increase. You talk so much about the infrastructure on helping repair the roads and sewage maintenance, along with a $500,000 increase to CES education project. Where's that money coming from?
Well, the same three sources that all of our I would say 3.5 sources, right? It's property tax, it's sales tax, it's state aid, and then we have fees. And so where that money is coming from, and the sort of the longer answer to that question is, when you get a good bond rating, because the bond houses say you have had good fiscal management, that allows you to, it's less expensive to bond. That saves you money that you can put towards that. When you talk about infrastructure for 2 or 3 or 4 years even, and then the state delegation comes back with more infrastructure money for roads and bridges, then we're able to tap into that. So that's, I think, an excellent example of where being an advocate, while you may not get resources that year that you ask for it, if you continue to pound that drum, and if you are good at that advocacy, occasionally you're able to get resources that come back for that. So ultimately, the answer to your question is our revenues and our resources are the same as they always have been. But when you are a conservative manager and you have priorities, being a conservative manager allows you to fund those priorities.
Mr. DiNapoli, did I get a sense that the issues with the city, the bad points they got, had to do with borrowing money and pulling their fund balances and having deficits?
Broad categories, yeah.
And they had that budget today. I think there was a $12 million deficit going in there. So is it too big? Where should it be? And what is the city supposed to do once they get, keep dipping into their rainy day fund?
Well, again, when we identify issues, so there will be a scoring, there will be points. So if you get too many points and you end up at one of the thresholds of stress, that's when we identify communities being in stress. So although there are some key points where the mayor needs to keep an eye on those issues, she is, and she's managed them in a way that Syracuse, while those issues are there, they have not risen to the point where, from our perspective, they would have caused this city to be in a level of fiscal stress. So that's why we say the scoring, now that we have multiple years and we're going to keep doing this on an annual basis, what the value is really is to examine trends. So we have some communities where their trend line is going in the wrong direction. They're getting more and more points. We have other communities that were on a stress list at one time, and actually, again, using our categories as a roadmap, they've actually either gone to a lower stress category, or in some cases actually now gone into the no designation category like Syracuse is in. The strength of Syracuse's management is that Syracuse has never been in stress. So, my obvious word to the mayor and her colleagues is keep managing the finances and the budget in a way that you will, even if you've got some tough issues to deal with, as we've identified, you will not be in a situation where you're going to find yourself in stress based on our measurements.
And Ellen, I would just add to that this is the least amount of fund balance that we have used. And also, when you look at trends, what you will see from year end to year end is that we have never used as much fund balance as we have predicted that we would, because we have been very close to our revenue predictions with sales tax, with property tax, and with state aid. But, you know, as long as I have been mayor, our sales tax numbers have steadily ticked up. But sales tax is a very volatile revenue, and so it could start to tick down if there's certainly if there's another recession, or maybe it's peaked. So, and that's why a budget, you want to have enough flexibility in those numbers that you can move from category to category so that you can hit those unforeseen crises or unforeseen changes that may happen. You know, I always talk to the Comptroller about our pension payments. If the stock market goes belly up and we being the state don't make our pension returns, that shortage will be figured into what we owe in our pension costs. We have to have that kind of flexibility because, again, we're not looking into a crystal ball. It's a planning document.
And the mayor knows we just ended a rough year with the stock market, so stay tuned on what the contribution rate will be.
Is there anybody else from the media that has any questions on topic?
Yeah, for the comptroller. I remember from reading your report, I think Fayetteville was one of the only municipalities locally that showed signs of distress. Do you offer, I mean, what do you do with the community like that? Do you offer advice to them, or are they kind of on their own and just use this as a
No. Oh, no. Again, part of the purpose of this is to identify communities with issues, and then we provide the opportunity to step up the kind of support that we can provide. So that certainly has helped with that issue of developing a long-term financial plan if you don't have one, to do a risk assessment, to do a budget review, to do an audit of government operations if that will be helpful to identify efficiencies. So there are a host of supports that we provide the Comptroller's Office on an ongoing basis. If there is a community in stress, we accelerate that support if they want it. That's not mandatory, you know, so we offer it. I don't remember off the top of my head if Fayetteville had taken advantage of any of those resources. The other piece that I should mention is that the state legislature and the governor developed a local government restructuring board, which is another process using another list for identifying communities that are in some level of budget or financial risk, where there's the opportunity to apply for participation in that program, which results in the possibility of recommendations for greater efficiency that would come from the board, coupled with the opportunity for some grant funding up to about $5 million per municipality. So in New York, we have two sources of assistance beyond the usual for communities that are in stress. We have the accelerated support from the Comptroller's Office of the kinds of services and help that we can provide, and we also have the local government restructuring board process, which provides some specific recommendations on efficiency and cost savings, and the opportunity to receive some additional grant money.
This community's been going through a discussion of consolidation. I don't know about the census and metropolitan government possibilities. With that kind of, what's your thought on that? Is that, alleviate a lot of this fiscal stress? A lot of these, there's less government, less governance.
Well, I'm sure there's a fair amount of debate about that. In my view, obviously, is each community has to work those kind of questions out on their own and have their own process of shared input and shared decision making. What my thought has often been in this whole general area is that there are a number of efficiencies that can be realized through sharing services, through, in effect, consolidating services. It doesn't necessarily require a full consolidation or a merging of municipal entities or dissolving one of it. Very often when you get into the more aggressive consolidation discussion, you get sidetracked on a host of side issues and local politics, small p politics, and you kind of get away from, all right, how can we do this better and more efficiently if we join forces? So, and I know you've done some of that here, in the region already. So, I would say, this community will work through, that issue of whether a merger or consolidation makes sense outright. But I would respectfully suggest it should not divert from the opportunity for there to be a continued discussion, not just between the city and the county, but school districts and municipalities broadly, to talk about, are there ways for us to do things together whether it's more purchasing together or, going out for bids together or, consolidating some of our back office operations together, sharing personnel, those kinds of discussions I actually think can provide some more immediate reward in terms of efficiency and cost savings without the extended, discussion and process of outright merger. But each
Ellen-
community will figure that out.
Ellen, I'm smiling because I obviously didn't know you were going to ask that question. You notice the Comptroller just listed all the things that we've already done. We've already consolidated purchasing. We already have done back office with PeopleSoft. We've done a tremendous amount of shared services with our planning department. So you're looking at somebody who's done it and will continue to do it. But you have to make sure that you know what you're doing, and that you're very open with people about it, about what your goal is and how you're going to get there, and what the plan is to move through it. Because oftentimes, I think just in general, public servants, politicians run into problems when they overpromise and underdeliver. And with something that is important as local government, that's as close to the people as local government, that provides really important services like police and fire and water, to name 3, or snow removal here in Syracuse. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver on those important services.
And you need to let your customers know what the impact is going to
Yeah.
be. You need to let your employees who will be charged with still providing the services, what will be the impact. It needs to be a broad conversation.
Is there anybody else from the media who has any questions? Off topic, go ahead, Tom.
First for the Comptroller, do you feel as though there are any things that the state could have done, added, or changed to improve the budget for this year?
Well, again, by budget you mean the state budget? Oh, the
Yeah.
state budget.
Yeah.
Oh, there are lots. We have our 70-some-odd page report that's out. Look, at the end of the day, as controller, I don't presume to make judgments or substitute my judgment for the legislature and the governor who are charged with making those decisions. But my overarching concern is one on a lack of openness and transparency, both in terms of process and ultimately in content. We've had other years where budgets are done last minute and decisions seem to be rushed. That seemed to really have happened this year. I was in the legislature. I can remember some of those years where you get the piles of bills last minute, you're expected to vote on all of it and understand what's in there. You had another year like that this year. And I think as we continue to navigate through a challenging time where I think the public, rightfully so, is demanding more and better decisions that are tied to transparency, openness, let us know what the alternatives are, give us a chance to react to some of the decisions that you're making. You really didn't have that in this budget process. So I think the fact that you still saw a heavy reliance on lump sum appropriations, money that will be decided later how it's going to be spent. Often that is an opaque process, which communities get which funding and why, who's making the decisions on where the money goes. I think we need to do a better job in that area. A big concern that we've identified on a continuing basis, this budget did increase the debt burden to the state, actually even beyond what the governor had first proposed. So debt is another area where I think perhaps a little more of a conservative approach would have made sense.
Yes, sir.
Your reaction, I guess the U.S. Attorney's Office is looking into for reaction.
I don't have any reaction. I think that everybody should let the U.S. Attorney do his job, and then we'll find out when he is ready to make his announcement. Chris, did you have a question?
Do you have any further concerns with Ford doing business in the city now that these allegations have come out?
I'm going to reiterate, I think that we should allow the U.S. Attorney to do his job, and then when he's ready to come out with his findings, or lack of findings, as the case was with the Moreland Commission, we can proceed there.
Mr. DiNapoli, your office, does you look at the let's say, the economic development funds that
I did-
go out, the economic development funds that go out, some they're being questioned in a sense of how they were being installed in certain projects. Are you on top of that, or is that just something you know?
Well, it depends because, as we've often pointed out, some of those funds now are not going through a state agency, they're going through an authority and then going through a not-for-profit that's been set up. So, again, that gets that concern about accountability, following the money trail, and many of those funds are now given out in a way where we do not have the review that we would normally have, for an agency giving a grant to someone. But, when we talk about economic development, it's very broad. So yes, there are some programs that in fact we do have a review role or contract role. There are many that we do not. We have argued for, on any number of occasions, when our authority to review, especially what's called a pre-audit, on a pre-contract review, that's been frankly whittled down over the past few years, and we've often raised that concern when the legislature has been considering that as part of the executive budget proposals. We've often lost those battles. So now some of the accountability questions that are coming up, many of these are areas where there should be more transparency and more review, certainly review from the Comptroller's office. But, there have been some programs where we have taken a look, for instance, the economic development, the advertising contract, including for the startup program, where we had some criticism and concerns about how that money was spent. Again, to the extent that SUNY plays a role in some of this, again, that's another area where we haven't had the kind of oversight that we would have in past years or with the traditional state agency. So, I think one of the lessons of recent times might be to take another look at the levels of review that perhaps should be in place, so there could be a more appropriate sense that the money is going where intended and into the right hands and for a good purpose.
Any other? Sure.
Comptroller, your office looking into this is off topic for Buffalo Billions, looking at any contracts there?
Well, again, it does get into that issue of which contracts flow where, and we are doing a number of reviews and audits on various economic development programs. And the Buffalo Billion is not like a discrete pot of money, it's various pots. So we have an audit underway right now with the Excelsior Jobs Program through Economic Development. So we are looking at a variety of economic development programs across the state, some of which may impact on that. But, again, when you do have an investigation going on, we're also very mindful of not doing anything that would interfere or impede with the work of prosecutors.
Yes, finally, for the mayor, just regarding the city's budget, do you foresee, it just passed, any vetoes or any of the changes that the council?
I do not.
Just one last thing, Comptroller, any legislation you're pushing for the last, 5 or 6 weeks we got going with all the...
Well, probably two. One, we're going to be updating our fiscal reform agenda, which speaks to some of the questions that you asked and others asked, but I'm not announcing that till Wednesday, so I can't talk about that right now. But one particular area where we've had a real concern has been the issue of local development corporations, LDCs. That's another example of entities that are set up with good intention, often for economic development purposes, and we've seen some real difficulties where, again, there hasn't been the appropriate accountability or transparency about the funding. Taxpayers often end up on the hook for decisions being made by LDCs. We saw recently in Monroe the sentencing happened for some of what came out there. Down in Rockland County, Ramapo, there was just some indictments all having to do with LDC and financing of certain projects. So we've asked for some change in the ground rules on how LDCs operate and for explicit authority for our office to have audit authority with LDCs. We have a very limited role right now. I think it needs to be broader. Last year I was very pleased the legislature and the governor moved on our proposals for reform of IDAs, industrial development agencies, not necessarily 100% where we'd like to be, but a very significant reform. And actually Bill Magarelli was one of the leaders on that issue, your own local assembly member. LDCs, even in greater need of reform, even less transparency and accountability with LDCs than IDAs. So I would hope that, especially given the sentencings in Monroe, the recent indictments in Ramapo and Rockland, that our proposals will get some serious attention. I think reforming the way we oversee LDCs is long overdue in the state, and there's certainly plenty of time. This legislation's been out there for a number of years. It's passed one house at different times. I think it's time for it to pass both houses.
All right, thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Excuse me.